Hey folks, welcome to our first tutorial about how to read research papers. We will for sure do a lot more different types of videos and more so in depth about this topic, but I thought of just creating a very introductory a very introductory tutorial about how anybody can just come to research papers and articles from journals and just extract as much information out of it as possible. Okay, so we have a sample research paper here: mental attention tai chi effect with older adults. It's just a random article I found, and we're just going to go through it really quickly to try and help you to, well, first, not be intimidated by the research paper, and number two, to try and extract as much information as possible with kind of the least amount of effort and and kind of the least amount of, brain power usage. You don't. It's not hard. It's not intimidating. It's very easy. So let's just go through it. I think we'll go through, four main things I'd like to talk about to try and extract any research paper. So we'll go through them one by one. Okay, so number one is the abstract. So the abstract of any research paper is kind of like the summary, like the main important parts of the whole paper. It's like the summary of the whole, the rest of the entire research article. Okay, and so obviously it's probably the most kind of bang for your buck. You want to read all of this for sure, and most of this, many of the authors usually make the abstract like as very simple and as very straightforward as possible so that any reader can understand it. So it's very helpful to just start at the abstract, and more often than not, any questions you have, the abstract will probably find it. So check through the abstract. That's probably your most important guide. Okay, you have to understand that many times the additional pieces, like the background, the method of the rest of the research article, like 90 to 95% of the rest of the research article is not really necessary to read in order to understand what happened in the article, in the experiment itself. Okay, so don't worry about that. Just focus on the abstract and then just move on. Okay, so number two, you do want to try and look at the methods part, more specifically, maybe depending on how much information is in the abstract of the methods. Very specifically about what type of study method was used, right? So if you want to kind of look at keywords such as randomized trial or a double-blind study, right? Those two are probably the most important when it comes to having a very gold standard of getting, experiments done in a lab, right? So try to look at the methods and see if there is any of those gold standards. I don't see it here, but it depends from study to study as well. And in this case, I'm talking about more specifically about, medicinal articles, research articles, articles that have to do maybe with pharmaceutical drugs and medicine in general, things like that, biology. So usually those would have it. I think this one is more of it's more of a injury epidemiology study kind of thing. So it's talking about Tai Chi. So it may not have that, but in general, many of the other studies would probably go up with that. Okay. So number two is methods. Keep that in mind. Number three this is the abstract. The conclusion is a small thing in the abstract, but I encourage you guys to just skip ahead. So skip ahead all the way back down to the bottom of the conclusions of the actual article. Many times, again, the most important, summarized, meaningful takeaways from the experiment, from the whole study, will usually just be in the conclusion. And so just check that out, because that's going to tell you exactly what the author took out from his uh, from his study. Okay, so and you also, just another point, if the conclusion, like in this case, is quite long, kind of long, uh, maybe don't look at the whole thing. Just look at the last one or two paragraphs, and that should, uh, you know, that should really tell you the gist of it, right? So what happened, what were the cause and effect, so on and so forth, and also the limitations, right? So the limitations will also tell you how much, to heart that you should take this study, right? And lastly, so that was the conclusion. And lastly, I think it's always uh, a good practice to just skim down towards the acknowledgments, the other contributions, the competing interests. Just look at them and see what sorts of folks have funded to this research, so that you can just know what sorts of biases that might take place, right? So if this was something like a research article on nutrition and food, or certain drug, or a certain drug, then if in the contributions or the additional interests, the competing interests and acknowledgments, if there was like a drug company that paid for this research, or if there's something like a corporation that paid for the research, you may not be comfortable with taking that to heart, right? Because there may be bias in that case. So, for example, in this case, the project was funded by Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. So it's, you could kind of infer it as a perhaps a government research grant, this was. And so to some extent, at the very least, there could be bias, but at the very least, this seems like a very credible funding source. So the bias may be as kind of little as possible, and so the study may be pretty good, right? So those are the key four things that you can use to really quickly scan the entire article and just extract as much information as possible, so that you could use it in your daily life or apply it into other things in your life. Okay? Hopefully we can continue on with this series, and hopefully I can just show you guys a little bit more of the tips and tricks I use to again read articles and get as much as I can out of them. Thank you guys for watching.